When it comes to defining the GOAT of CS, everyone has their favorite, and Zywoo isn't an obvious candidate. Really, there are only two primary candidates. It's going to be Simple and Zywoo, because nobody else hit the peaks that these players hit. And when you think about it logically, Zywoo dominated in CSGO. He came first a couple of times, although I think one of those years is hotly contested, 2020. I said at the time I thought Zywoo was probably number one, I believe, but I lean now towards thinking Simple when I watch back some of those games. He then goes into CS2 and he still maintains his level and he maintains some dominance and he continues doing well. Now they've got the Vitality era and he's done so well. But when I look at Zywoo, I can't help but think to myself, that ain't Donk. I watch it and I go, this guy's really good at the game. This guy hits some great shots, but I just think that ain't Donk. And when I watch Zywoo in CSGO, I look at the game and I just look at it's just like, damn, dude, he plays so smooth. He's got all these great reads. He's doing so well. And I just think to myself, that ain't Simple. And that's really the crux of the issue. Actually, the biggest problem I have with defining a CS GOAT, a GOAT across all titles, is that CS has lasted an incredibly long time. And there's different skill sets maybe to a certain extent required in, especially if you go from like CS 1.6 to CSGO. But still, even in CSGO to CS2, you look at Donk, and could Donk play at the same level he's currently playing at in CSGO? He would be dominant no matter what game he's in. But I think CSGO lent itself to a slightly different playstyle than CS2 does, and I think that would have definitely changed his skill set at least a little bit. And that does mean that I tend to favor the idea of separating the titles a little more. The idea that Simple is the GOAT of CSGO, Donk, or, well, you could say really, at this point the game is a little too young to say there's a GOAT. And you could argue that Zywoo's the GOAT because he's been here pretty much the entire time. But the problem is that when I think about GOATs, it's not just about how good they are, it's about how much they kind of warp the game around them and the meta around them. And when I look at Donk, he changed the way we think about riflers. He changed what we thought was possible from a rifler. Pros are literally talk about learning from Donk. He changed the entire face of the game and how you take engagements and how you think about movement, right? So it's hard for me to say that you could put anyone above Donk in CS2, even though Zywoo has been around longer and done some incredible things. Even if Zywoo was to you could get #1 this year, and I would still feel like Donk just because of, and I hate to say the word, but I gotta say it, Maui was right, cultural impact. Simple has a lot of cultural impact, and so did Donk. And it's unfortunate though, because like you have to accept Zywoo does get underrated a little bit, because when Simple came along, Simple was compared to mere mortals, to a Kenny S, to a Cold Zera, to an Olaf Meister. He was compared to mere mortals when he showed up on the scene. And so you could see that Simple was head and shoulders above everyone else. You could just see that he was this whole new beast. And it was just like, it was just completely different. And then you look at Zywoo and he comes in and he's immediately compared to Simple. And so it's almost a little unfair for him, because if he came along a couple years earlier, well, if Simple came along in 2019 and Zywoo came along in 2016, you might see more people leaning towards Zywoo because you would have that era of dominance before Simple showed up. However, when I look at the actual gameplay style and the fact that Simple warped the game around him to a much higher degree than I think we ever have seen from Zywoo up until this year, and that's kind of the unfortunate thing, because this year, I feel like Zywoo really started to move towards the idea of warping the game around himself, of being the main character, making the plays that need to be made to force the game to be played around you instead of just allowing it to come to you, which admittedly, that sometimes actually is more impressive, because if you play aggressive, you can force your opponents to react, and that can sometimes make it a little easier to put yourself in good scenarios, versus if you play passive and the entire scene is trying to counter you and you still are able to almost never have a bad game, always be in position when your opponents are trying to figure out your rotates and stuff like that. Like the skill that it takes to do that is unbelievable. And sometimes I feel like it could be harder than being aggressive to a certain extent, but it's still, regardless, does feel like Simple had more impact in his peak year. And I think the way that should be thought about is, and me and Maui talked about this a little bit, the most important thing in terms of a GOAT candidate is the length of peak, or the peak you hit and the length that you can maintain that absolute peak. When I look at Simple, I look at him having a 2018 that just outclasses what Zywoo has done in any of his years. And although across time, Zywoo seemingly, I believe, has had more top 1 years, more years where he's better than everyone else, does his absolute peak, does his best year compare to Simple's best year? Well, this year was one where I think he actually could have made an argument for that. This year is one where, with his team playing well, but also, again, he's really started to come into his own in terms of taking over games. And if we go over to the second half, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. He absolutely takes over this game. But then if you look at what's been going wrong, unfortunately, in this season, is that he has also been having some tough results. He's been having a pretty weak T side. I think this series, he has a couple games where he absolutely takes over, but then he has a few games where he's not that impactful of a player. I actually think Zywoo is one of the weaker players on Vitality. If you look at obviously you're cherry picking here, outside of the 2 maps where Zywoo was clearly the best player in the server, the 3 other maps, he was, he wasn't the best player. He was maybe their second, maybe even third, maybe even weaker depending on the map you're looking at. It's unfortunate because I think if he continued what he did from the start of the year and did that the entire year, I would be much closer to calling Zywoo my overall CS GOAT than anything. But I really do just object to the idea of an overall CS GOAT. And that's really where my commentary comes in on this. Is Zywoo the overall CS GOAT? I think you could definitely make the argument. And I lean a little bit towards Simple, but I could be swayed either direction. But I primarily just object to the idea that you play a somewhat different game with different skill sets that are prioritized, and we don't separate the GOATs across them. And that also does lead into the same idea I'm getting at here, where I'm more interested in saying Simple because he is the GOAT of CSGO, and I put that as by far the most important part if I'm talking about the GOAT of CS, that you are the GOAT of one of the games, just because of the fact that I, again, kind of object to the idea. But still, Zywoo seems to be kind of hitting a peak. This season is like a month and a half, right? He could still recover this season. And if you look at this year, he feels like he's hitting a peak this year, which is so insane because Simple had this insane 2018. What was that, like his 3rd year? By the way, I know people are going to be looking at this and saying, well, before Zywoo showed up, Simple only had like a number 6 and a number 4 on HLTV. Keep in mind that HLTV rankings used to be done a little differently, where they feel like they were much more, and MVPs as well, I believe, felt much more based on outcome. That like the better team, the best player on the best team was most likely to be the number 1 player, rather than the best player outright, best individual. Whereas, like, I think if you look back at 2016, I don't think there would be likely any realistic possibility. I mean, this is just vibes check, but this is my memory of it, where you have 2016, I believe that's the year where Kenny S is number 7, and they say Kenny S was by far the most impressive individual of the year, but he's number 7, right? I don't think you'd get that today, and I think there wouldn't be an argument if you use the 2016 ranking pattern that Zywoo would be number 1 this year, which is to say that I think Simple was a little underranked in a couple of those years before Zywoo showed up. He could have been a little bit higher. He could have been a top 3 player maybe once or twice in that area. I don't know where I got a little bit sidetracked there. But this is an insane game from Zywoo. If he could continue or could have continued his first half of the year performance, or if he picks it up and brings it back to that same level, I do think there's always been an argument if he's the CS GOAT. And I could definitely, someone in the comments could even sway me, because I really am not that heavy on either side. The fact that I kind of object to the idea of a CS GOAT really is more so what drives me in this direction than anything else. But this really, really insane game from Zywoo. I think he goes 17 or 18-0 on their T side, gets some insane picks, he gets some insane plays, he makes some really smart out plays as well. I think he gets his kill on Malbs. Yeah, catches Malbs looking the wrong direction, and then he's actually going to make a nice little play at the end as well, where it's going to be Rops is going to die towards CT, Apex is towards site, and Zywoo actually backs his way up and throws a flash over that perfectly blinds these two players. Zywoo peeks out and gets the kill, and then, or Apex peeks out, gets the kill rather, and Zywoo gets the final one. Insane game from Zywoo. Unfortunately, they couldn't take the series. I still have Simple. I mean, as my GOAT of overall of CS entirely, I would say let's just talk about the individual games. But overall, I give the edge slightly to Simple.